never saw the ocean until I was 19. And if I never see it again, it'll be too damn soon. I was a child coming out of that train, fresh from Amarillo into San Diego in all her glory. The sight of it, all that water and the blind, crushing power of the surf, filled me with dread. I'd seen water before, lakes, plenty big, but that was nothing like this. I don't think I can describe what it was like that first time. You can imagine the state I was in when a few weeks later they gave me a rifle and put me on a boat. When I stopped vomiting up everything that I ate, I decided that I might not kill myself after all. Not being able to see the land and that ceaseless, chaotic rocking of the waves. I remember thinking that the war had to be a step up from this. Kids, they can be so fucking stupid. I had such a giddy sense of glee when I saw the island and its solid shores. They transferred us to a smaller boat in the middle of the night. Just our undersized company with our rucksacks and rifles and not a word. We took a ride right into it just because they told us to. The lieutenants herded us into our platoons on the decks and briefed us. The island had been lost. That was exactly how he put it. Somehow in the grand plan for the Pacific, this one tiny speck of Earth, only recently discovered and unmapped, had gotten lost in the shuffle. A singularly perfect clerical error was all it took. It was extremely unlikely, he stressed, that the Japanese had gotten a hold of it, being so far east and south of their current border. But a recent flyover reported what looked like an airfield in the Central Plateau. We hit the beach in the middle of the night. I heard talk of landings before, and I'm not ashamed to say I was scared shitless. I don't know quite what I expected, but it wasn't what we got. It was thick, heavy silence. Behind the lapping of the waves and the wind in the trees, there was nothing. No birds. No insects, just deathly stillness. We went another 100 yards deeper into the eerie tranquility of the jungle. We stopped in a small clearing for the officers to reconvene. It was obvious even they were spooked. I wasn't a bright kid, but I knew enough to know that something was very wrong. It was like the whole island was dead. I remember I could only smell the sea despite the red blossoms dangling from the trees. It wasn't an airfield. On top of the plateau, I don't know what it was, but I've never seen anything like it. I don't think anyone ever will. If I tell you it was like the Aztec pyramids but turned upside down, so that it sank like giant steps into the earth, you'd get the basic idea of it. But that somehow fails to capture the profound unearthliness of the structure. There was no sign of individual pieces in the masonry. It appeared to have been carved out of a single immense block of black rock into a sharp and geometric shape. It was slick and perfectly smooth, like obsidian. But it had no shine to it. It swallowed up even the moonlight, so that it was impossible to see how deep it went, or to even focus your eyes on any one part of it. It was like it was one giant blind spot. My platoon drew the honor of investigating the lower levels, so we descended the stairs as the rest of the company surrounded the plateau. We took the stairs slowly and carefully after the first man to touch one of the right-angled edges slid his hands down to the bone. At odd intervals down the steps, there were several small stone rooms, just Simple, empty, hollow cubes of stone with one opening facing the pit in the center. There was no door that we could see, and with the opening being 4 feet off the ground, you'd have to put your hands on that black razor-sharp edge to climb into it. We circled the descending floors, shining our lights into each of the small structures. They contained the same featureless black walls and nothing else. No dust, no leaves, no other material from the jungle. The whole monument was immaculate, as if the place was just built, but that couldn't be right. The whole structure felt old to me somehow. Very old, despite having no way to articulate the particular reason. Down near the bottom, you could see that it simply sloped away into a darkness that swallowed the flashlights. We tossed first a button and then a shell casing down into the pit and waited, but no sounds returned. No one spoke. We just turned away from the yawning abyss and continued our sweep of the bottom rung of the last of the small structures. The body in the back corner was almost invisible at first in the thick shadows, but the long spill of drying blood reflected the light of our flashlights, and it led us right to him. He was coiled tight, arms around his thighs and his face tucked into his knees. You could see how badly he was cut. His clothes opened in ragged, bloody tatters to reveal the pale skin and bone beneath it. He may have been dressed in a Japanese uniform, but it had been reduced to ribbons. I only had a few seconds to look at him before we heard the first shots. It echoed like the buzzing of faraway insects in the still jungle, swallowed almost instantly by the blanket of quiet. By the time we reached the top, the rest of the company had vanished. There were shell casings on the ground and the hot smell of gunpowder in the air, but they were gone. The trees were deathly quiet around us. There wasn't a trace of the nearly 50 other men that had come ashore with me. I could taste bile rising in my throat as panic threatened to cripple me. I felt crushed between the yawning pit and razor edges on one side, and the dead jungle and the pounding ocean on the other. The silence rang in my ears, and I struggled to still myself. They were just inside the jungle, waiting for us. They came out from between the trees with all the sound of a moth, simply sliding into our view. I'll try to tell you what I saw, the same as I did to the army doctors at the hospital ship when I first woke up, and again 6 other various officers over the following months. You'll have the same reaction they did, that I was a dumb country rube suffering from heat stroke and exposure and trauma, that I was crazy. You know me. You know I'm not crazy. And I remember every second of that night with crystal clarity. The first one that caught my eye was wearing the skin of a Japanese soldier, all mottled with the belly distended from rot, and the head drooped, useless and obscene on the shoulders, tongue swollen and eyes cloudy. I could see where it was coming apart at the ill-defined joints with ragged holes in the drying flesh. At the bottom of each of these raw pits of blackness, deeper than the stones of the building, a darkness that seemed to churn and froth like an angry cloud. The thing moved suddenly, the head snapping and rolling backwards as it dashed toward us. I had my rifle clasped tightly in my hands, but it simply didn't occur to me to fire. All I could do was gape silently at the macabre sight bearing down on us, and think absurdly of my mother's marionettes. A gun went off beside me, and I turned to see a dozen more of the horrors darting silently in on us. Among them were a few more rotting and swollen forms, but the majority wore the same uniforms as us. They were pale, fresh, soaked in blood. More bullets zipped through the air. I saw the grisly things hit again and again, but they never slowed down. I caught a glimpse of the first sergeant's vacant, glassy eyes as his head dangled limp from his shoulders. I saw the great ragged wound in his back and the shuddering darkness that inhabited his corpse when he leapt just past me without a sound, landing like a graceful predator on the soldier beside me. The others around me began to drop in a silent dance of kinetic energy and blurred motion. I was on the track team in high school, and it could have gotten me to college. I didn't need an invitation, I just ran. I ran blind through the jungle, tripping over tree trunks. I ran until I saw the ocean, and it struck a new ringing note of terror in me. I don't remember exactly deciding to swim, but when I turned back to the tree line and I saw one of those white, bloody things emerge, running on all fours, the hands splayed wide and the back contorted and cracked in an impossible angle. Well, to this day, the mere thought of the ocean still brings on a cold sweat. But that night, I let it embrace me. Let the tide drag me out to sea, if only to bring momentary relief from the impossible monolith and the terrors on that island. The days I spent drifting offshore and blistering in the sun were a welcome release from the silent island. I never saw the war. They sent me home as soon as I recovered. It was comforting in a way. When I thought no one believed me, it allowed me to believe that it never happened, that it was a product of my mind. But as I get older, I found that it's pointless to lie to anyone, especially yourself. I know what I saw. I think somebody else believed me too. I've seen the map of where they tested that H-bomb. Out in the South Pacific. I woke up easy that day. As soon as my mom had yelled up the stairs, I was up. I got my clothes and showered and did my daily morning routine. I headed downstairs and into the kitchen. My two sisters and little brother were eating breakfast. They looked at me with the same emotionless gaze as my own, and I nodded as if answering, although they already knew. They had the dreams too. My mom asked us why we were being so quiet, but we just shook our heads. Later, we started driving to school. Our mother commented on the 3 pale yellow holes in the sky. They had been there for weeks. They appeared overnight. They could be seen over the entire planet. Everyone had their theories of what they were. Some thought they were a sign from God. Some thought they were a hole in the ozone layer. They may have been right, but no one knew. But the children knew what it did. It caused the end. As we drove, we saw children and teenagers all with the same emotionless gaze as us. They all had had the dreams too. They all knew. I reached school first. Mine was the first stop. I walked from the car, waved to them as they drove off. This would be the last time I would see them. I headed up the path to the yard of the school, waiting to go in. The normally semi-loud schoolyard was dead quiet. It was cold, but none of us cared. No one said a word. None needed to be said. We all knew what each of us were thinking. And as a matter of fact, we knew what every child under 17 was thinking that day. That one part of our mind hadn't been corrupted yet, and let us have the dream. We didn't tell anyone, not our parents, not our aunts or uncles or grandparents, or anyone older than 17. Only we, the children, knew. It was time to go in, and that's what we did. We entered in orderly lines, the first time in, well, ever, really. Our teachers stared in amazement as we quietly entered our classrooms and took our seats. We did our work as we were told, although there wasn't really a point to it. It wouldn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. At 11:45 a.m., every student looked at one another. We all nodded in silent agreement, and despite the protest of our teachers, we marched out of the school in unison and into the yard. We stood in silence, looking up at the sky, but nothing had changed yet. But soon, some who cared about each other hugged. Those who loved each other, or if someone had a crush on someone, they kissed. To my surprise, I was kissed. I didn't know her name. I don't think I had even seen her before. She put on a small, sad smile, and she held both of my hands. I put on the same smile, and all of us looked up in near unison at the sky. The 3 yellow holes blazed. A white light erupted from the center, and soon, everything went white. The shrieks of adults could be heard everywhere, but not the children. The children weren't scared. The children knew.